Mr. President, there are 10 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, 2 years ago, I came to this floor of the Senate to talk about the rules process and nominations in particular. Because even 2 years ago, we were experiencing the beginning of what I saw as a trend. Every president, when they're elected to office, they've got about 1,200 nominations that have got to come through the Senate for what's called advice and consent. Those individuals go through background checks at the White House, go through interviews at the White House, go through extensive references, and then they're recommended to the respective committees here, where they again go through background checks, conversations, interviews, public hearings, questions for the record after the hearing is over, and any follow-up from any individual American that wants to be able to give input, whether it be outside groups here, anywhere else in the country, and then they come to the floor of the Senate. In the past, those individuals move through quickly because there's 1,200 of them. But the minority has always had the right that when they got to the floor to do one last little slowdown. They can make a request, what's called a cloture vote request. That cloture vote, when they made the request, the minority could always do that, any individual could, to say, I know they've gone through all these extensive checks, they've already passed the committee, they've gone through all this process, but at the end, I want an additional 30 hours of debate on this person. But it's not just 30 hours of debate, it is actually what's called a full intervening day, and then after that, an additional 30 hours of debate for that person. Now, that's been done in the past, but very rarely in the first 2 years of a presidency, because there's so many nominations that go through the process. If we go back to President Clinton, there were 8 of those requests. President Bush, there were 4 of those. President Obama, there were 12 of those. For President Trump, there have been 128 of those. Now, I saw the trend 2 years ago of where this was headed. This is a new structure for the beginning of a presidency, and my concern at that time, I have even a greater concern now. It is the trend of where we're headed as a Senate. Is this going to be the new normal? This used to be what was normal. An occasional nominee would come through if they were very controversial, but most of these nominations weren't really all that controversial. In fact, of those nominees that came that had the extra time, 48% of the folks that were asked for additional cloture time, they then got more than 60 votes. In fact, 37% of those got more than 70 votes. These weren't controversial individuals coming through. It was just intentionally slowing down the process. I've heard folks say, well, some of these judges that are coming through in the district court level, that there's so many of them, they become very controversial. Well, the judges, quite frankly, every single judge that comes through has to be approved by the 2 senators from their state. It's called the blue slip. For all of those district court judges, that's been honored by previous administrations and this administration. This Senate has honored those same blue slip for all of those district court judges to say if it's in a Democratic state that judge will be there, both those Democratic senators have to approve of that person before they come. If it's in a state that's 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, it has to be split, both of those, or 2 Republicans, they both have to agree to it. That's for all the district court judges. Yet they're still being slowed down. They've gone through the background checks, they've been approved by their home state senators, regardless of party, and yet they slow down. So whether it's executive nominees or whether it's judicial nominees, this 128 individuals that have been slowed down creates a new slowdown in this Senate. So 2 years ago, I made a proposal. Let's go back to something that Harry Reid proposed and was passed by this Senate in 2013, long before I was here. It was a 2-year agreement to just say, here's how we're going to deal with what's called post-cloture debate time, that if there's a controversial nominee, here's how we'll handle it. I went to my colleagues and said, let's revive that rule, and instead of making it for 2 years, what was the Harry Reid rule, let's just make it from here on out. I made that proposal in the last Senate. We took that to the Rules Committee. It passed the Rules Committee, but could not pass this floor. I thought it was eminently kind and bipartisan to say I would go back and grab Harry Reid's rule to be able to say if it was good for Democrats when they were in leadership, it should be good for everybody, regardless of it's Republicans or Democrats. That was not passed. So I've once again come back and made a proposal and say, let's fix this. And it's not just fix this for now, let's fix this from here on out. Whether it's a Democrat president or a Republican president in the future, let's have a simple rule. If we get to a nominee that there says, though it's gone through the background checks in the White House, it's gone through the committee and passed the committee, it's gone through additional questions for the record, even though it's gone through all that, if people want to still do additional time, to say they can still request the intervening day, but then instead of 30 hours after that full day, it would just be 2 hours of additional time. Quite frankly, most of the time that we've had the 30 hours of debate, there hasn't really been debate on the floor for 30 hours. There's been debate on the floor for like 15 or 20 minutes. And then the rest of the time, the floor sat empty, or we debated other things other than the nominee. So we'd set aside 2 additional hours. Do this for district court judges, do this for most of the nominees for the executive branch, but still hold that 30 hours for things like circuit court, Supreme Court, cabinet level, those type positions. Sure, keep the 30 hours, but for the other 1,000+ nominees that are the deputy secretary, assistant of whatever it may be, allow them to go through the normal process and not slow down the process. The chief counsel for the IRS has not been confirmed. Went through the last Congress, didn't get there. Passed 25-2 out of committee, passed 26-2 out of committee this time, yet is requiring 30 hours of additional debate on the floor. Will probably pass overwhelmingly, but it's just a tactic to slow down this floor. We've got a lot of business to do. Let's make a rule that's fair, and let's make it work for everyone. Because my concern is long-term for the Senate, this will be the new trend. And the next time there's a Democrat president, this is what Republicans will do to Democrat presidents. And this will be the new way that we operate. This isn't helpful for any president. This isn't helpful for the Senate. And this is something we need to fix. We've got 2 years of muscle memory on this now, of doing it over and over and over and over. I don't think this gets better, because I think the political pressure will be there to just keep doing this and slowing things down for everybody. So we put a rule out there. It's gone through the Rules Committee. I've encouraged my Democratic colleagues to join into this, because there will be a Democrat president someday in the future. And they won't want this coming back at them, and will say this is unfair. And I'll agree, but it'll happen. So let's fix it now. Let's resolve this in this Senate, in this time, from here on out, not a short-term rule, long-term permanent, be able to take us back to this being the norm when we could work better together. I love hearing everyone say we should be more bipartisan as a body. I'd love to get this body working again. That's this proposal. This proposal is not a partisan proposal. It's not trying to get leverage on anybody. It's trying to get this body back to working again. And I hope in the weeks ahead, when this rule actually comes to the floor of the Senate, we can get overwhelming bipartisan support for it, and so we can get back to working together. With that, I yield the floor.